Good evening, good evening, and welcome to Couch Conversations with the Doctors, where true health is wealth. I want to thank you guys for joining us on this evening. And as always, we're going to go around our great panel as we begin to introduce everyone that's here with us on this evening to the man who has the best art there is. And I actually think that art galleries are in his home. That's our very own Joe Harrington. Joe.
Well, thank you, Nikki, and thank Congressman Davis and you for providing this platform. It's an honor to be here. I'm always glad to be among friends and colleagues. My background is mostly in public health and healthcare. Worked at three different hospitals, worked for the city and state health departments, retired in 2017 from the Illinois Department of Public Health, where I was the regional health officer for Cook County as well as an administrative law judge.
Outstanding, and thank you so very much to my colleague who usually leaves us to go and have fun in the sun, but guess what? He's still stuck here in Chicago. That's our very own Douglas Graham. Doug?
Hey, Nikki. Well, good to be back. I'm a retired physician. I worked in the western suburbs for about 30 years and then joined the congressman in his office for 2 years. It was an eye-opening experience. It's a real honor to be here.
Outstanding. All right. To the man who says I threaten him to be here every Monday, but he tends to always be on time. That's our very own Dr. James Miller. Dr. Miller?
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Nikki, and thanks to Congressman Davis for having this platform that allows us to come and to share with our village. And I'm a retired internist. I retired in 2019. I'm still interested, though, in healing our community. Though I don't practice clinical medicine, I still am in the business of healing. So glad to be here, and hopefully I can contribute something tonight.
Outstanding, outstanding. I want to say hey to Virginia Knight, who is here with us. She says good evening to everyone. To the Wolfgang Puck of healthcare, to the one who's that chef extraordinaire, the weight loss guru, that's our very own Dr. Tony Hampton. Tony?
Thank you, Nikki. Happy to be here. I believe that we all have the potential to be metabolically healthy. That means that our blood pressure, our blood sugar, our cholesterol numbers, and our waist are in a normal range. Many people have not achieved that, which is why I think focusing on metabolic health is so critical. So I'm here to help spread that message and answer questions about any health topic. I really think that that's the key to healing. I just got to make sure everybody knows that so that they can start working towards that. So happy to be here as usual.
Thank you so very much. I want to say hey to Yolanda Williams that's here with us on this evening. She says, good evening to all. Virginia Knights also says, thanks for working on the neighborhood garden today, Dr. Miller. Oh, I guess you were over there pruning
I didn't know she saw
and
me.
getting it done. All right. To who we call Dr. 100, the community doctor extraordinaire, AKA that's Dr. Maya Green, better known as Dr. 100.
Hello, community. Thanks, Nikki and Congressman Danny K. Davis, for even having me. One thing I love about what Dr. Miller just said, not only the people who are in the exam rooms are the healers. Our community heals in so many different ways. So I'm excited to be part of the conversations about how our community heals and also be part of the solution of healing our communities. Thank you for having me.
Outstanding. I want to say hey to Stephen Brown. Oh, I want to say hey to Stephen Brown, who is here with us. He says, I love you all. Dr. Hampton is on my healthcare team. All right. He's on your healthcare team for Chandra Brown. I love this program. Thank you so very much. To Brother Tara, he says, hey to Dr. Tony Hampton and everyone who is here. Thank you so very much. Dr. Mason is trying to sign on, so he'll be here shortly, having a few technical difficulties. I want to just let everyone know that the congressman will be running late tonight, but he is on his way. And for all of you who have been asking me about Dr. P, he'll be back next week. All right. With that being said, Dr. Miller, I know you got some stuff for us. Let's go.
Yeah, I've had some recent conversation and meetings and about things that we can do in the healthcare community to look at how to get people into careers that they can become more successful with. And one of the things that that I think that people, when people have a passion about something, they tend to be more committed to it. And that commitment is sometimes what is necessary to help people to become successful. And when we begin to look around at some of the issues and the problem that exists in the African American community, one of the problem that I end up going to these various events and things, and I somehow I'll end up saying, "Where are the boys?" When I'm at the schools and we're looking at people that are involved and some of the things that I'm involved with in gardening and that thing, and I keep asking, "Where are the boys?" And but sometimes it's because that is not what their interest. They don't have a passion for what we are involved in at that point in time. Not in that way. Sometimes people get involved in something and then they learn. I really do have a concern, a care, a love for this particular thing or event. But one of the things that one discussion that I was involved in is people who are interested in sports and athletics. And, as we know, everybody, when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, if you play basketball, you think I'm going to play in the NBA. That's the fact of the matter that's, not going to happen for most of the people. However, that love of the game, that passion shouldn't die just because you're not going to have a career as an NBA player. Maybe there are other things that you can do. You can become involved in sports medicine. You can become involved in some of the management part of athletes. Things that will keep you in the game and around the game, and therefore will hold your interest. Things that you have passion with. And so, I'd like to sort of let us have some conversation about how do we get people to use the thing that they have a passion about to help them get involved in ways that can become a career effort for them. Because that's, we look at, like I said, we look at how people maybe they just don't get involved in the things that we think that they ought to, but they do have a love for something. And maybe it's because we don't really look for that as being things that will attract them into something else. In other words, the fact of the matter is that it's usually the thing that the individual is trying to do or trying to get to that will carry them to being successful in something that they may not have started out trying to be a trainer. They might want to be an NBA player, but ultimately ended up because they were around the game, they were around people that were playing basketball that kept their interest enough that the other things that they needed to develop and to learn, they were able to carry those things into and driving them to perform and to develop the necessary tool. So let's see if we can have a conversation about that and look at how that may be one of the missing things that don't occur so much in our school systems, especially in our community, that we need to look at how do we get back to doing some of those things. Joe,
Well,
you got any?
don't everybody get speak at the same time. While you're thinking about what your comments are going to be, want to say hey to Connie Taylor, who is here. Connie is here. She says good evening to everyone. Also want to say hey to Miriam Pittman, who is here. She stopped by with us on today. Hey, Miriam Pittman, glad that you stopped by. Remember, no question is too big or small. You can drop your questions right here in the chat, or you can simply send it. If you want to stay anonymous, you can simply send it through Messenger and remain anonymous. So want to make sure that you guys know that you can always ask that question. Go right ahead.
I think everybody just
Go
see
right.
Can you guys? Joe, you have any comments on that passion and what we can do to try to bring that out and get folks involved in things that help them to develop a career?
Well, I guess my initial observation is, and I'll quote something I heard from Dr. Mason, who actually heard it from Eugene Pincham. You can't be what you can't see. And
Mhm.
so I think the for me the real opportunity is to have more people like us or similar to us, particularly younger people, that can serve as role models and perhaps appeal to young men on a different level and actually communicate with them in a language that they understand, in a style that they understand. Um, I've had the opportunity to meet and work with a lot of younger people, and I always learn from them. But um, I try to go out of my way to make sure they think that I'm on the same level that they're on. And so many times, what happens is there's a perception that uh, perhaps because of the way I speak, and sometimes really just because of the way I'm dressed, that I don't have the same type of experiences that they've had. And so sometimes it's important for us to actually reach back and spend time in the community and working with you to help them see what options are available to them.
I'll chime in and say for me, it's about perception becoming reality. I remember, I don't know if
Mm.
there was a time when maybe me, Pete, and some other brothers actually had a chance to meet some doctors, and we were impressed. And I hate to be so direct about it, but we were impressed with their cars and the things they had. And we, to be honest with you, when you grow up, I grew up on the west side of Chicago, and the role models we had who had nice things were not doctors. They were, the local drug dealer or, things like that. So the first thing is about perception, right? So the first thing that I think about is if a person thinks I can't do it because I can't afford it. Some people don't even apply to schools because they look at tuition, not recognizing that if they're from a disadvantaged family. I mean, the number of times we ran into families. My kids went to WashU in St. Louis, and a large number of those kids of color were actually on scholarship. Now, I wasn't. My kids weren't on scholarship because they had a doctor and a pharmacist for parents. But so a lot of times the price tag may not matter as much as you think. Number two, and they help pay for these kids housing, so it was like a nice advantage. The second thing is, I'm not going to be in school all those years. That's crazy. I'm not going to be making money for a minute. And what they don't realize is that, when you leave medical school and you start your residency, you actually start making an income. Now, back when we were residents, it probably was in the 30,000 to 40,000 range, and I'm positive that number's got to be in the 60,000, 70,000 range. So once you become a resident doctor, yes, you're not, you're at a, you're not like 18 when you're doing this, but once you become a resident doctor, you're actually making a decent living. I mean, there's plenty of people that don't make 70,000 a year. And that's considered pennies for a doctor, relatively speaking. And then you think about, the number of people who can become doctors. I mean, we're watching the NBA playoffs right now, and maybe about 60 people every year are given the privilege of playing in the NBA. But if you think about the number of resident, I mean, at any given time, there's 140 or 50,000 residents being trained. So your odds of becoming a doctor are so much higher than any of those other careers. And my colleagues and I, even though some of the guys on the panel are retired, many people can work into their 70s. We have doctors working into their 80s. So there's no fear of having a 3-year, NFL career, or on average, maybe a 5 or 6 year NBA career. LeBron is an outlier. That's not typical. So what happens is that you can actually, with that type of education, do pretty good, and doctors can make 2, 3, 4, 500,000, $1 million a year, depending on which area you go into. So I just think perception becomes reality, and I think that if we could show them that this is something they can do, trust me, I remember me and Pete when we were in medical school, we struggled through that. But so we're not like some, these super smart, you're different. No, we struggled and we made it through. The difference between us and the people who didn't make it is that we had some Jimmy Butler in us. We had that dog in us, and we refused to give up. So if you don't give up, and I'll be honest, think about it, people, when we're in medical school, most people, once they get into medical school, will find their way to graduate, like most, right? So your chances of getting to that final goal is very high. But the key is to give it a shot and know that this is a possibility. And it's not just your life you change, it's generational, because then you'll be able to leave this place one day and then leave something for your kids and their kids, and maybe inspire them to do the same. So I really encourage anybody that's dealing with a young person or is a young person themselves, give healthcare a chance. You'll never be without a job if you are in healthcare. It's a very high demand job, whether you're a nurse, doctor, even a medical assistant. There's a demand that's beyond what we actually have in terms of what we need.
Yeah. First of all, it's great to be back with my family. And I can remember there's a book that I read by Zig Ziglar. And, Zig Ziglar is an entrepreneurial business guy. And he said there's this principle called be, do, have. And basically it goes like this. If you want to have something, you have got to do something. There's a set of activities that you need to do in order to have it. But then in order to do those activities, you actually need to become that person. And I can't tell you, throughout this whole process of my career, I had people that made me transform my mind into where I wanted to be. So even looking at, a Dr. Terry Mason and saying to myself, this could be my house. He looks like me. You know what I mean? Just everything about that made me say, now that I've convinced myself that I can be that, now what are the activities that I need to do to have that? So it was be, do, have, become that person, like in your brain. Then do those activities, right? Sign up for that class, go back to school, take the prerequisites, take the exam, MCAT, LSAT, whatever it is. Then you can have the activity. Now here's the challenge. So much of our society has told our young Black men what they can't be and what they can't have. And if you buy that message, if you buy it, if you really buy into it, which is hard because there's so many influences now, influences that we didn't really have. You have a phone that gives you images of who you are, right? And the more images you look at like that, the more images they will show you. But where are the images that's showing us Tony Hampton and Dr. Maya Green and Joe Harrington and Dr. J? So if you don't get those images in your brain to say, I can be that, then you don't do the activities, and then you won't have what you need to have. And then, of course, the end result of that is we know that Black communities do better with Black physicians in terms of health outcomes. It doesn't mean other people don't care about us. It just means that we look at this health equity thing for real, for real. We're from these communities. So I can explain a procedure to somebody. I remember being a medical student and having the big team is there. I'm the lowest person on the totem pole, maybe third year medical student. There's the residents and there's the chief and there's the attending. And I remember the attending saying, well, we're going to do this, this, and this, and this, this, and this. And the patient says, looks at me and say, is this the thing I should do? And I'm like, oh my God, I'm flunking out of school already. So I had to co-sign what my attending said. But that's it. And it made me coming back to the room, explaining the exact same thing, but in a way that they can see clearly I didn't have a ulterior motive to what I was saying. I'm giving it to them straight. And so it does matter to have a workforce, a healthcare workforce that's more diverse, more women, more black women, more black men. It matters. Should we do more cultural um, cultural training? Yes, but we also need more black physicians. And I'm thankful for images like Dr. Mason and Linda Murray and about James Miller. Y'all, we were looking at y'all and thinking to myself, that's gonna be me 3 years, 5 years, you know. And so I'm happy to be that for somebody else.
Yeah. How do
Yeah.
we do? Where I'm agreeing with all that you guys are saying. But when I look in the pot, I'm seeing too much waste there. We gotta, what I'm saying? We gotta figure out a way to stop the waste, to create, to save some of that need to be saved. So is it, so what we are doing as going on with our career is an excellent example, but we need to do more reaching out. We need to do more relationship development within our community, not just with our patients, but with our village, because now they can begin to see a person as opposed to, I mean, the fact that when they see a doctor, generally there's a barrier there in terms of them feeling comfortable to ask the question, what do I do? But when they see that person, they can ask that question. They feel comfortable with saying, well, I have these particular issues. How do I get beyond that? So, what do we do to help that process?
James, and I'm grateful to be here with my colleagues. I've been on technical blackout here for a while, so hopefully everything will be all right. But I've been listening to what we're saying, and one of the programs that I'm involved in addition to the urban health program at Illinois, is CPAS, Creating Pathways for Academic Student Success. And what we have to do is look at that feeder line, that where are the people coming from? And one of the things that we're looking at as we're trying to do what we can to increase the number of students that are ready to come into medical school and be able to deal with that rigor, is to have these programs so that we can do two things. Number one, do as best selection we can for those students that have demonstrated their readiness to be able to do the work. I mean, this program, we had the mini medical school graduation. These were like 9 and 10-year-old little kids that they all got stethoscopes and what have you at Rush for the completion of this program. So yeah, I would agree that these are things, but we need more images where we see ourselves and in a positive light. Unfortunately, given what we're seeing too much of, and I'm not saying it's bad, or it is what is bad from one point of view, but we're seeing too many of us, walking out with our hands behind our backs and the ambulances coming. I mean, those are the visuals that we're seeing that the news media plays a lot, and it doesn't bode well for us being able to do some of the work that all of us are trying to do in terms of increase the numbers. And it was really helpful when we were at Illinois that we had over 36 African American medical students when we started, and I would say that all but a couple graduated. But we also had, to Tom's point, we had Linda there, we had Hoy were there, we had a bunch of other docs that were there that were helping us, James, to what Dr. Tony was saying, that was showing us that there was a way through, that we could, if we worked together, and we did, we would be able to work our way through. And nowadays, I'm going to tell you, the pipeline is being cut off because we have other, what happens is other people come to this country and they see an amazing opportunity. And for whatever reason, they latch on and do what they need to do to make that opportunity real for themselves and the family. And they may have 2 or 3 generations of doctors in their family. I look at some of the folks that I know that it was at at Mercer, at County, where a whole family, The brothers, the sisters were doctors, the aunts and uncles, grandparents, everybody. And Judge Pincham used to always say, you can't be what you can't see. And so we really do need, and I don't know what the answers are, guys. I mean, we're all doing the best we can in the spheres that we operate in, and ladies. But we also now have got to deal with the fact that we're not able to get, not seeing students getting enrolled like they used to. And that's a problem.
One of the so two things, I've been listening to this conversation, and I think it's much needed. So thank you all. Uh, as a former educator, we do have our our youth are being faced with be do haves from so many different perspectives. Dr. Thomas mentioned be do have, and now social media wants to tell them to be something that's not healthy, do things that are not healthy, do music or kind of whatever, and uh, tell them to have certain things that at the end of the day don't contribute to a collaborative community, but are more for self, you know, are more important, So the shiny object is on the Lamborghini, the shiny object is on the money, the shiny object is on so many other things. And if you follow your purpose, all those things do eventually come if you align with your purpose and community. But there's not a lot of representation uh, regarding that. That's why I love kind of what we're doing here. I love, like, you can turn this on. Where do you see, let me count them, where do you see one, two, three, four uh, black male physicians? And then you have Mr. Harrington, you have Dr. Graham. Like, where do you see a space where kind of that's highlighted? Um, that's why venues like this are so important. The other thing, um, is there are organizations like CPAS, I Am Able, Cook County Physicians Association, things like that. There are health fairs that Dr. Miller does. We are a lot of the pipelines are being cut off because there are a lot of other people that recognize the worth, you know, and our community, we're moving to it. I hope we move to it faster. Is in the space where we a lot of times have to recognize our own worth and support ourselves. So those organizations, community, uh, if the spaces on social media need a social media boost, all these other places, every, rapper got a social media person to push their agenda on social media. And that's where our youth are, you know? So a lot of times that's what's needed. Um, and I do see a lot of the organizations moving to that, uh, we have to go where the youth are. And then the other thing is, what I love that I'm seeing is I'm seeing a lot of the organizations that serve Black and Brown youth align with each other. So they're not. I always say these things. They're not like fingers, They're not fingers. They're not like CPAS out here. I Am Able out here. Cook County, they've come together. When they collaborate, they strike like a fist, you know? And so I'm seeing that. I'm looking forward to more of that. So more collaboration. We have to go where the youth are, you know. It is worth hiring a whole social media person to push the same agenda, just like the Kardashians have. And so we have to go where they are.
Yeah, I want to pick up on something that Maya just said because you may have heard on the news there was this teen takeover an event in Tinley Park this afternoon, and social media is really pervasive and has a significant impact upon a lot of our young children and adolescents, and moves them to do things that they wouldn't ordinarily do. I also, and I'm not going to push back, but I also want to share a personal experience I had. I had the opportunity to meet a former gang member in 2010. He was one of two former gang members who was featured in this documentary a friend of mine did, Derek Grace, called On the Front Line, Taking Back the Streets. And he's a former Four Corner hustler and West Side Gang. And I got to know him. I'm still friends with him today. Today, he works at CineSpace and is a grip. He's got a great job. He's taking care of his kids. What turned him around, and by way of background, he says his whole family was pretty much in the gang. And by the age of 14, he joined the gang because that's what people did. By the time he was 17, he had his own apartment. He had 20 people reporting to him and had $50,000 in a shoebox, and people telling him to go back to high school. And he saw no reason to go back to high school. Fast forward, one of the leaders of the gang he was in got out of prison, and he felt that that was a great opportunity to get back with him. He had changed his life. He had become a minister in prison, saw the errors of his ways, and was able to turn this young man around, get him on the road. That former gang member became a minister. Now runs an organization on the West Side to keep kids out of gangs. So I think it can be done. I don't want to demonize our kids, to use the words of the mayor, but we have a problem today that we didn't have back in the day. And when I say back in the day, I'm talking about 10 or 15 years ago. And we really need to catch our children as early as possible. And Dr. Mason talked about it. We need to recreate that village that is raising the child.
That is outstanding. You know, Nellie, Al Marshall Ellis says, I love the message. If you can't play, coach. If you can't coach, write. If you can't broadcast, there are many things that you can still do to be in the game. So thank you so very much, Ellis, for sharing that with us. Camille has a great question. And Camille, I see that Dr. Hampton sent you a link, but we're going to actually read your question right before the end of the show. And we can get a couple different perspectives on it just as well. So don't think that I'm overlooking you. I see your question right there. I want to say hey to my cousin, Latrina Joshua, who is here with us. And she says, yes, entrepreneurship isn't easy, but if you do it, it works and it is worth it. So thank you so very much for sharing. We actually have an anonymous statement just as well. And the statement reads, I grew up on the West Side just as well. Want to say hey to my friend, Tony Hampton. We both grew up on the West Side, a few blocks from each other. And we also both went to Lane Tech. I want to stay anonymous because I didn't see the drugs, but there were gangs, and the gang members were different in that day. The gang members actually made sure that we went to school. They made sure that we were safe in our walking. I think some of the problem is parenting. Where are the parents? Any thoughts on where the parents may be?
Yeah, well, I want to just say this about that is that the parents are there. The problem is they don't know where the resources are, or they don't really know how to deal with the issues because they've not been trained to deal with this. I mean, we all are seeing new stuff, and our young people are learning more outside of the house now than young people ever did. I mean, before they really learned from inside the house. I mean, kids are being introduced to social media, and and there go the information. And so, I think it was Joe that raised this issue about that. And so, maybe what we need to do is to make certain that we are there in those spaces where these young people need to learn, need to see someone that can be that mentor. We might be successful in our careers, but if we are not there for them, then they, again, you're back to what you're saying is if they can't see it, they don't know how to be it. In terms of the parents, if they just don't have the resources, they don't know where and how to make certain that their kids are getting what they need, then they're sort of at a loss, and I'm sure frustrated and having a difficult time managing that. I know. I used to talk to my parents, and this is, was about raising children, and the problems that and issues that my children was having were so much different than issues that were during my time, and now these things have gotten to be much more of a problem. Someone talked about getting started with young people when they're at a very early age in terms of trying to get them on the right tracks. And I applaud that, because they're also getting started at an early age on the wrong track, being exposed to the wrong thing. And so so I think that is one of the problems that parents have today. I mean, it's just knowing how to deal with it and having the information, how to handle their children and how to teach them and how to make certain that they have the resources that they need and how to motivate them and keep them. Again, we don't have the village. The village that we had is not as strong as the village used to be. There was a lot more help, when I was a child than it is today, in terms of having your neighbors to make certain that the eyes were on you when you were not in the house.
Yeah, the term that comes to mind, Dr. Miller, I agree with you, is PTSD. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a set of parents, I'm not saying all the parents, there's a set of parents that are raising their kids with their trauma brain, with this survival, like whatever happened to you. We know that there's health terms and mental health terms like ACE, adverse childhood experiences. And there are things that happen to those parents. Maybe the absence of people, not necessarily abusive parents, but people that didn't care and walked away. And they're raising this generation of kids with the trauma that they promised they would never do. But when you're operating from this survival technique, you just barely made it, right? And now you're able to to pay the bills, to have a place to stay, and maybe some food on the table, and buy the kids something to eat and some clothes. And then all of a sudden you think, my job is done. That's it. That's all I got. Now it's time for me, right? Because they're living this trauma and they want healing. They've never had counseling, never thought about the fact that if you had a big tumor growing on your neck, you'd ask somebody, I better go check this out, right? But there are things that a big tumor that's grown on your little child brain, something that happened to you, but you've never asked yourself, I should get this checked out. So I'm saying this, that you have generational trauma, and you have parents that they're beat down. And I'm trying not to, I'm in my doctor mode, caregiver, is that they're in their brain, they're like, I'm tired. I've done everything I could do. And so now that kid is like, but I still need I'm still 12. I'm still 14. I don't know. My cerebellum or cerebral cortex is not completely developed. I'm 25 years old. That person still needs direction. And meanwhile, that kid is out living out this sort of, adolescent kind of brain. And they're involved in activities that they shouldn't. But the parent doesn't have enough in them. It's like the old saying, you can't drain blood from a turnip. It's like they ain't got nothing to give them. They don't. They just barely made it. And I'm saying this to say, so it goes back to what Dr. Miller said. We've got to be present in the grocery store, at the Walmart, at the Starbucks. Make eye contact, be friendly, because these kids they've never seen men and where they can respect them, and we will respect them back, right? The only men that they see is the drug dealer, drug addict, or the police, right? And we ain't none of them. But the thing is, I just think that, like Dr. Miller said, we've got to be around and be present even in the moments that, I stopped in a Starbucks. I remember this because I just became an attending, and I was in Hyde Park, and the kid asked me, I had a pager on. So that's how long ago this was. Now, folks call your cell phone, but that's neither here nor there. But I had this pager on, and the kid asked me, well, first of all, I had to have the demeanor of someone that he could talk to, right? So he asked me, he said, what is that on your waist? I said, oh, that's my pager. And they said, well, what do you do? I said, I'm a doctor. He said, so what do you need that for? I said, well, when my patients get sick, they call me on this. He said, why don't they call your cell phone? I said, well, that's not reliable, and they have to have a way to. But it was great though. The whole interaction was just, it was an example of just what possibility. I don't know where this kid is today, right? But I'm saying if more of that could happen, we never know where we might be.
Pete, I think
Mhm.
you're absolutely right, and I'm thinking about what I've heard here, and I agree with you, Dr. Miller. I think we probably got closer to 2 generations of children that have not had the benefit of full parenting.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say parenting, I don't mean just the parenting the way that we know about it, the way I'm
Yeah.
sure everybody on this panel knows about it. Our parenting was beyond just our homes. At least
Right.
in my neighborhood, it was.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody, every mama, every lady on the street was a mama. A man on the street was a dad, like a daddy, and we all worked together. And we had resources. To your other point, Pete, there were resources.
Third Street Northwest.
And what we need to do, or what happened was, is that when there were decisions made to move steel production and other things out of the United States early on, we have to look at this whole thing in its totality. It just didn't happen. When they made the decision it was cheaper to make steel out in Japan or wherever, all those jobs around the steel mills in East Chicago, Indiana, because my stepfather worked for those areas, and a lot of other jobs left. And we had a lot of communities in the community I grew up in. The grocery stores were owned by the black folks. Even the laundromat was managed by the black folks. The cleaners, the record shops. I know that y'all that goes back too far for some of y'all, but all of those things. And if you needed work, you could always find some work. You could always find a way to make money and help. And in our family, you had to do it anyway because my mother would be standing right there with her hand out when we got paid to make sure we paid our part, so that we understood that raising a house, being in a house, ain't free. And you've got to be able to do these things. So I don't want to go on like a broken record, but the other thing is that there's been so much interference by the government in the destruction of the black family. And I saw this firsthand when we had programs that were allegedly set up for welfare. But when you incentivize somebody to have children and not have a man in the house, what do you think that does over time? And that was the condition where a lot of people lived in. And then when you import drugs into the community, we didn't make crack cocaine. That didn't grow someplace. That was made by somebody and brought in our communities. And
Our
of course,
community.
the gangs, they're no different than the other gangs that we used to have. That used to be Italian and other folks who ran alcohol and did all those other kinds of things. That's always been there. But what happened to us is that
Mhm.
it's a whole new meaning. And lastly, I agree that we've changed how we value ourselves. Value now is a function of likes, whatever that means. It's a function of affirmation by your peers. And that's what I look at it as. And that is what drives what I think helps guide the kinds of behaviors that we see from people. And maybe some of the more psychologically oriented folks on this panel can talk about this, because I mean, everybody wants to feel important. And I'd be last to say that our major corporations are complicit in this. When you take a major company like Interscope Records and they go after a guy named Chief Keef, who made a record called I Don't Like. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard it, but they gave this young man a contract, and he wasn't even old enough to sign it.
Turn left on Independence
So
Avenue.
there's a lot of stuff that's going on underneath that we're not seeing and we're not talking about, but are certainly applicable to why we are where we are today.
Yeah, I want to
Oh,
jump
wow.
in and off.
So, okay. Go ahead, Joe, and then Maya, and then I got to grab some comments real quick.
Okay, I'm going to get through this real quick, and I want to piggyback on what Dr. Mason was saying, particularly the fact that he talks about things that were structural and systematic that have gotten us to this point. And sometimes we forget that we look at the way things are and think that's the way they're supposed to be. But when they're systematic and structural, they were designed to be a certain way. So there is a difference. And I've talked about this book before. It's called Poverty by America by Matthew Desmond. And what a lot of people don't realize is we don't have in our community, and I'm talking about Black people, a lot of generational wealth. Most of us have earned our money. We weren't given money. We didn't have money to go to school, but we made it over the hump, and we may now have some wealth that we could pass on. But there are other groups that do have generational wealth, and they benefit from that. And I wanted to look at the numbers, and I'm going to report just some of what I found. The poverty rate for white people is 9.5. The poverty rate for indigenous people, African, American Indian, Alaskan Native, is 25.9%. The poverty rate for Blacks is 21.7%. The poverty rate for Hispanics is 17.6%. You can't expect groups that have poverty rates this high to achieve at the same rate that other groups don't. And so some of this is historic, is structural, and is systematic. Now, many of us have done what we were told to do. We pulled ourselves up by bootstraps that we didn't have to be where we are. And we are encouraging other people to do, but we have to understand some of the barriers that are put in our place to achieve what we're talking about.
Outstanding. Maya, Dr.
Doctor,
Green?
go ahead with your comment. I'll come behind you.
No. Go right ahead, Maya.
Okay. All right. I underscore that. One of the things that you consistently see, I mentioned it with our legislators. I'll mention it with our healthcare leaders. We have to continue to support the people that support our community, because you saw me say this when in conversation, I think when Dr. David Ansel was on here. Poverty is a strategic form of oppression. I don't know if you remember when I said that. Poverty is a strategic form of oppression. And after people are pull themselves up by bootstraps, don't think they're not out there trying to cut those bootstraps of our legislators, of our health leaders, of our ministers, of anyone that's trying to heal our community in any capacity, right? So we always have to hold them up. I think a lot of times we look at our leaders and say, okay, they got it. You know, and it may not have been easy if it wasn't easy for them to get there, it's not easy for them to stay there. They don't make it like that. Poverty is a strategic form of oppression. They use it to oppress people that are not aligned with the system created in 1776. The other thing I want to say is, as we look at history, there's nothing new under the sun, right? That's in the Bible. We've heard it several times in our community, and definitely you know that proverb that says a child that's not embraced by the community will burn it down to feel its warmth, right? That's what those likes are about, affirmation. You know, they want affirmation from the community, and they're getting affirmed for burning down the community, so they do more of it, you know. So looking forward to, I'm glad there are institutions and organizations that are out there affirming our youth for doing positive things, affirming our youth for becoming the next leaders of the generation, the next healers of our own community, things like that. And I think that's part of the solution to where we need to go. I know we've talked about where we are, and you know, but that's part of the solution to where we need to go. And if we can make that as infectious as these likes, you know, I think we would go a long way in our community.
Well, Betsy Johnson says in the streets with the drugs, kids are raising themselves. There is no parenting in this generation. Parents are scared of their own children. Latrina Joshua says some of the parents are afraid of their own children, and others are trying to be the friends of their parents, not the parent. And I agree that resources are limited. She also says, yes, definitely the trauma brain. I agree 100%. We have to break generational curses, because if we do not, history will repeat itself. She also says we definitely have to be present. Tia Banks says, Dr. Peach, you are absolutely correct. Ms. Joshua also says, I think we should get these doctors on a panel and have an audience full of children and young adults. We need to get these children in the room with these doctors so they can hear their stories about how they made it. Our children need to understand that it is possible. WBY Faith says, how do we help our community when there's no empathy? Bonnie Smetley says, you guys are directly on point. WYB Faith also says, the system is set up to work for who it was designed to work for. That's not the Black community. It starts with us, one at a time. Want to say hey to Zahara Bassett, who's here with us, who is also tagging other people to join, and she's there at the agency called Life is Work, doing great work there. And Faith also says, again, the system works for the have and not the have-nots. Once again, we have a ton of these lame techians who have chimed in on tonight. I think Tony called all of his old schoolmates and told them to join him tonight. I think that's what he did. So really quickly, Val Talley says, Chief Val Talley says, I agree, we need the children to meet these doctors. Yes. Well, one of your lane techian says, well, no, I didn't become a doctor, but it is true that a child can't be what a child can't see. Tony and I went to high school together, and I'm a detective for the Chicago Police Department. Nikki, please don't say my name. I should blurt his name out right now, but I'm not going to do that. So he says, yes, but I became a detective. It is so true that a child can't be what a child can't see. That is one of the things that I simply love about Congressman Davis. He is so approachable and he is in the community. We have to remember to show up, and we cannot forget where we came from. So many of us forget where we came from, and we are not present in our communities because we're suffering from trauma brain because we want to forget our own communities. Wow. Donald Du has joined us just as well. He's been having some technical difficulties too. And the congressman, like I told you, would be a little late, but he joined us while he was in his Uber trying to get through the streets of DC. So they are both here. And I know you guys hate to hear me say this, but this conversation has been so infectious. It is that time. So since the congressman is here, it is Mental Health Month. And of course, next week is the holiday. So we will be showing a rerun of our shows on next Monday because everybody's going to have that holiday. But I know Donald wants to share something about Mental Health Month and something that is so important about mental health. And then Congressman, take us home.
All right.
Right after that. Go right ahead, Donald.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. Really good information on this evening. I just want to thank the panelists and all the participants for sharing some very positive information, uplifting information. And nothing can be more valuable for our mental health than getting good information that can lead to significant education and ultimately, as the congressman knows all too well, legislation. I just got to, take a moment real quickly to reference one of my mentors, one of my partners, a good friend of Congressman Davis's, Reginald Hatz Adams. For 40 years, Reginald served as community relations director over at Rush. And, Dr. Mason, I heard you talking about, Rush a little bit earlier. And, it's just so powerful what he was able to do with the Science and Math Excellence Network. Hundreds of kids came through that program and contributed significantly to their mental health. Not all of those kids went into the field of medicine. Not all of those kids went into math careers, but I can guarantee unequivocally that those kids did not go into the juvenile justice system, that they in fact were able to lift up other kids, other peers, and be an inspiration to their parents who gave them the opportunity to work within the medical health facilities. There's tremendous opportunities right now with community health workers. Of course, Congressman, and all too well from the days when we had community health days at Miles Square Health Center over 50 years ago. It was a great concept to get the grassroots folk involved in the healthcare movement. And that's what we need right now to uplift and encourage folks in terms of mental health. We need a movement towards healthcare, a movement towards the importance of life and living it. Folks cannot be what they cannot see. So we got to show them the best that we can do. Right now is the time. It's our watch. I say we can do it. With the leadership we got right now, the political determinants of health are key. We're always talking about social determinants of health, but we got to look at the political determinants of health. And again, acts like the Second Chance Act and other key pieces of legislation open up the door significantly for better healthcare in our community. Let me stop right there.
But Donald, if someone is in crisis and they need some assistance, how do they get to where you are if someone is in crisis?
Absolutely. Call 773-261-2252. You can also come to our Westside Community Triage and Wellness Center at 4133 West Madison, where we deflect folk from hospitals, we deflect folk from emergency rooms, and we deflect them from unnecessary incarceration. We know that oftentimes folks are depressed, they're in pain, they are just looking for a way to deal with their anxieties and depression. So we provide those opportunities for them at HSI. Again, 773-261-2252.
Congressman, take us home.
Well, let me just thank everybody for being on. You probably can't see me because I'm in a dark spot and I'm a dark person. And so dark on dark means that you may not be able to see. But I've been on for about the last maybe 25 minutes. And it was 25 minutes of some of the most profound discussion that I've been able to participate in and to hear. The question that looms for me is knowing what we know, understanding what we understand. The question then becomes, what do we do that we're not already doing? A friend of mine wrote a little book and he says, what do I do next when I don't know next what to do? And the question sort of becomes, everything that I've heard is relevant. Everything that I heard is true. But do we start early enough trying to impress upon our young people, especially? I keep hearing more and more and more about the Civil War. As a matter of fact, a member just asked me to sign on to something tonight related to an accident that took place near Memphis, Tennessee, and Marion, Arkansas, where about 1,200 people were killed in a shipwreck, an accident. And he says, we don't know much about that. I still believe that parenting opportunities, especially for low-income parents, is something that we need to seriously invest in. We had the mayor out Saturday, and we gave him a lot of information relative to what ought to be done. I think there are two things that would help. One is the parenting opportunities for low-income parents in disadvantaged communities and disadvantaged areas. And the other is I went to something Saturday. I had a funeral I was going to, but before I went to the funeral, I stopped at something that a group of young people have started themselves a corporation, a company, and there are about 20 of them. They're young adults, and their idea is to teach financial literacy, but also to make money. And they all have their jobs, they all work, but they want to make money so that they would have money to use to do other things. Economically, it's a real challenge for depressed communities that don't have the resources. And many of those places that used to be in the area are no longer there. And I think as people got the opportunity to become a part of the larger community economically, They forgot about some of the things. You know, I see African Americans in nail shops. I just don't know anybody that own a nail shop, but I see African Americans just filling up nail shops, and many of them who go in to get their nails done, they don't have much, but they get their nails done, and they pay to get manicures and pedicures, and the people are making money from it. So I think this question of economic development and what it means have to be raised. I can't thank you all enough. And I can't thank Jill Hunter Williams. I'm actually sitting in Jill's car because she picked me up. She took me to the meeting that I had to go to with another group talking about health and medicine from Boston, Massachusetts. And then she picked me up again. And I got in the car and I'm on her telephone participating. So technology is great. So I want to thank Jill for her flexibility and all of that, giving me the opportunity to communicate with all of you. This is going to be a very telling week for us. This is the week that we have to try and come to some conclusion relative to the debt limit. We hope that we're going to be able to do it, but I know it's tough. So I'm going to ask everybody to pray as you continue to think and do all of the other things that we do. I can't thank you enough. Have a wonderful evening. And until next week, I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. All
Thank you for
right.
all you do.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you, Nikki. I think we've managed this night.
Yes.
Okay.
And for those of you who are asking for our Until Next Mondays, you'll get them next Monday. All right. In June, we're going to have youth on the show along with Donald Duth and the Bright Leadership Institute. So we will see you guys then. Take care.
All right.